It's no secret that the late Steve Jobs was a genius and visionary who changed our world with his remarkable products. But if Steve Jobs knew the direction the company was headed in today, he would be turning over in his grave. With the spotlight on Apple in recent months, it has become increasingly clear that the company has some serious questions to answer about how it's handling user data, privacy, and government appeasement. Stick till the end of this video, as we'll explore why Apple has come under intense scrutiny for its privacy policy and consider the implications for consumers. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, believed in the need to protect users' personal data. In 2007, he introduced iPhone's 4-digit passcode lock, which allowed users to protect their phones in the event they were misplaced or stolen. This added layer of security assured users that their personal information would always be secured. He also believed that people should have control over their personal data, and that companies should not abuse it by not having the user be unaware and without consent of what was going on with their data. In a live interview, Steve Jobs gave his definition of user privacy, and he said, "Privacy means you know what you're signing up for," and repeatedly. During his tenure as the CEO of Apple, he implemented various security measures to protect users' personal data. For example, he introduced the opt-in feature in the iPhone, which allowed users to choose how much information they wanted to share with apps and websites at all times. Apple was so committed to users' privacy that they would deny law enforcement access in investigating cases involving crime activities and even terrorism. Apple has been at odds with the law enforcement for years over the evidence handover policy. Even the federal governments, like the FBI, have been at war with Apple to create a backdoor access in all Apple iPhones, but Apple refusing, claiming, "Ultimately, we fear that this would undermine the very freedoms and liberty our government is meant to protect." Although in the end, the federal government did get access to a terrorist attacker's iPhone without the help of Apple. So, it begged the question, why did the FBI ever need a backdoor in the first place? Jobs was also a vocal critic of companies that abused user data. He famously took a stand against Facebook in 2010 when they introduced their instant personalization feature, which allowed third-party websites to access users' data without their consent. Jobs decried the feature as a violation of user privacy and refused to allow it on the iPhone, claiming privacy should be of the utmost importance to the tech giants. But unfortunately, this same motivation to protect users' data is not seen in the current Apple leadership today. In 2021, Apple launched iOS 14.5, and in iOS 14.5, it included App Tracking Transparency System, which allowed users to remove consent for ad devices and analytics from whatever app they wanted. This new system forced the apps to ask for consent before they could use ad services and harvest users' data. This system was called the ATT system, and for Apple users, this was a step in the right direction. And what Apple found out was that most people don't like their privacy invaded. 62% opted out of giving up their privacy. But after 6 months of the update's release, it started to take a huge hit on big tech's profits. Companies like Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat, who rely heavily on data information to make profits, took massive financial losses. Apple single-handedly limited the growth of Facebook by just limiting their most important resource, data. If companies like Facebook could give less to advertisers, then the pushback from the companies was less money for them. This was relevant when in October, Facebook stock on the stock exchange went stagnant. Although these companies that relied on users' data took a hard financial hit, it didn't affect Apple nearly as bad. Apple does profit from data, similar to the big tech companies, but they do not rely on that income to support the business as a whole. The iPhone, iPad, iPod, Apple Watch, and Apple TV are products that keep the company as successful as it is. Apple uses their time to improve their products, whereas other tech companies have to rely heavily on Apple users' advertising and data harvesting. Interestingly enough, Apple did not put the same disclaimers as they did on other apps as they did their own. They used their opt-in settings for that and failed to mention their own personal data harvesting information that they take. Apple has a great way to look great on the surface, but it's just another business ploy of Apple. It seems apparent that in 2017, Apple changed its definition of privacy, believing that privacy is a fundamental human right, and what a fall from grace it was. This all started when Apple started letting the Chinese government take control of what apps are allowed in the Apple Store. The first thing the Chinese government banned was all the VPN apps. These VPN apps allowed Chinese users to break through the Great Wall of China. This Great Wall of China is China's strong arm of their authoritarian regime. It's the Chinese government's censorship of news and media outlets. The Chinese Communist Party claims this is to protect the Chinese people from misinformation, but that is hardly ever the case. But why would Apple allow the Chinese government to pick and choose what was put in the App Store? Because Apple is heavily dependent on Chinese products and their manufacturing production line. They have no choice but to appease everything the Chinese Communist Party says. 90% of Apple's production line comes from the Chinese sweatshops, which work around the clock for pennies on the dollar. And this is why Apple can afford to make huge profits. And if they dare challenge the Chinese Communist Party, Apple would be sanctioned and banned from China. Apple users have taken a back seat to the Chinese Communist Party's demands, and this far fall from grace keeps getting deeper. It's amazing how Apple still hangs its hat on its privacy, because nowadays it seems to be much more of a sales ploy tactic. Although Apple does not directly sell users' data, they do profit handsomely from letting third parties do it. 80% of the apps in the App Store use users' data to their own benefit under the developer's advertising or marketing clause. This is how Apple keeps their hands clean while still raking in big profits. Apple claims the iPhone users agreed to keep the contract from the apps, but these contracts are 100 pages long and are 7,300 words long. That's 200 less than the Bill of Rights. The majority of people just don't know anything that is in the agreement, or even have the time to go through all of this. And Apple does this with intention. This claims that consumers give consent, despite the illusion Apple puts out is misleading privacy policy. In all truth, giving up our privacy is now a tax users pay for digital media, and the majority of them are not even aware of it. And with lengthy agreement of terms, Big Tech gets full surveillance of all of our lives. They have figured out how to jump every loophole to make this all completely legal and rack in the huge profits. Apple's actions just keep getting more sinister. In 2021, Apple made claims that they are going to roll out a new system to start accessing all iPhone's users' photos in the name of protecting child sex abuse. A company that was caught using child labor to create products, and after getting caught took 3 years to cut its ties with the company. Apple claims they hold themselves to the highest integrity. Then how did you get in that situation in the first place? Greed. And to now, they all of a sudden care about children. This is a hard pill to swallow. Here's another example of another sales ploy by Apple. This all boils down to monitoring people and surveillancing users' photos. Amazing how Apple now has been working on creating a backdoor, which they fought so hard against. Profits and greed has gotten the best of Apple. To make things worse, this neural matching system they created can search for more than child sex abuse. Why? Does the government have something in mind for us? What if the government decides it doesn't like certain photos? Will they use it as a trackable crime? This is clearly an authoritarian ideology. Corporations and government collusion is not in the benefit of the iPhone users or the people. This is not what Steve Jobs stood for, or even created for the Apple smartphone users. He was against data harvesting, smartphone tracking, and the appeasement of any government, let alone the Chinese Communist Party. Although the neural march isn't up and running yet, it will be soon. I'm sure these new revelations are having Steve Jobs turning over in his grave, which leads me to this question: what's next?